Welcome to the third topic of Unit 2 Political Participation. In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at how exactly do you vote in the state of Wisconsin. As always, you should be following along with the note sheet that was provided to you with this assignment on the Google Classroom. Before we can address how to go about voting in Wisconsin, I want to answer the key question, what's the point of voting in the first place? In short, it was Plato who said the price of apathy toward public affairs is to be ruled by evil men. Essentially, the cost you pay by not participating in politics is you're going to let bad people make decisions for you that you don't think should have been made. Voting is how we control our government. It's a core belief in the U.S. Constitution we know as popular sovereignty, the idea that we, the people, are in control of the country and we hold the ultimate political power. We do this through voting. Now, popular sovereignty can be used by everyone voting on everything directly all the time, but that's really too time-consuming. So instead, you'll remember our founders created a republic. This means instead of voting on everything directly, we elect people to make those decisions for us. If we don't like their decisions, we get to vote them out in the next election. This makes knowing what politicians believe in, what they want to do with political power, and actually what they do with it extremely important. It was the Greek philosopher Aristotle who said, a right election can only be made by those who have knowledge. Essentially, you have to have knowledge of what politicians believe in, what they want to do with their power, and what they actually have done with the power they've been given in the past in order to make a good decision on who you want to trust with that power. Voting is also how we give legitimacy to our government. To be legitimate means it legally has the right to tell us what to do, within limits, of course. Remember, we have a limited government. So voting means we give the government permission to use that limited power on us. If you don't vote and you're able to, it just means the politicians can assume you're okay with what they're doing. As Plato said, I shall assume that your silence gives consent. Which translates today to, well, since you didn't say anything, you seem to be okay with it. This idea of elections giving legitimacy to government is why autocratic governments hold fake elections. That is, governments where one person has seized all the power, they pretend to have elections, and they do this to make it look like they are legitimately exercising the power of their people. It's meant to trick other countries as well as their own people into thinking that they're just using popular sovereignty. They're just doing what their people want them to do, when in reality, autocrats do whatever they want. They really don't care what the people want. This leads to the next question, who can and who cannot vote in Wisconsin? Now, you'll remember that voting laws are reserved powers of the states. The states are supposed to be in charge of creating laws about who can and can't vote and how you vote and all of that. Now, of course, that has changed with the introduction of marble cake federalism, but that's a lesson for another day. In order to vote in Wisconsin, you have to at least be 18 years old on the day of the election. You must also be a U.S. citizen. This is true of every state in the United States. Wisconsin has an additional specific law that requires you to live in your home for 28 days before the election. If you moved into your home within 28 days before the election, you can still vote, but you have to drive back to the neighborhood you used to live in and vote in that voting district. And then finally, you must also be registered to vote in the district you now live in. The city of Cudahy, for example, is divided into 5 separate voting districts. Each of these districts is further divided into 3 separate wards. If you move from Ward 1 into Ward 2, you're still in the same voting district, but you'll need to re-register because the people on your ballot for Ward 2 might be different than the people on your ballot from Ward 1. This is because you're not just voting for president who represents the entire country, but you're also voting for members of the state government, state assembly, state senate, local government like the county board, city council, mayor, school board. So whatever ward you live in might have different people on their ballot, depending on where you live. You can see here on this map that districts 1 and 3 both go to vote at the Cudahy Family Library, whereas districts 2, 4, and 5 all come to the high school to vote. When you show up at the polling place, so if you come to the Cudahy High School because you live in districts 2, 4, or 5, you have to let them know which district and ward you live in so that they can give you the proper ballot. Who can't vote? Well, anyone under 18, anyone who's not a citizen, people who don't live in the voting district, and people who are declared incompetent by the court. Being declared incompetent generally means you have Alzheimer's, dementia, or some other severe cognitive mental disability that doesn't allow you to make proper decisions for yourself. Additionally, people currently serving out a felony sentence cannot vote. A felony is a serious crime that's punishable by more than a year in a prison. People convicted of felonies can vote after serving all parts of their sentence, but they must re-register to vote. This is not true in every state. Some states ban felons from voting for the rest of their lives, but in Wisconsin, once you've served every part of your sentence, you're allowed to re-register and vote again. Also, anyone who has made or has become interested directly or indirectly in any bet or wager, depending on the result of the election, is banned from voting. What this means is that it is illegal to bet on the outcome of an election. If you do so, it has now become illegal for you to vote in that election. This was put into law in the state in order to prevent corruption. Okay, now we know who can vote and who cannot vote. Let's take a look at how you actually go about the process of voting in the state of Wisconsin. The first thing you have to do is register to vote. This means filing with the government saying you meet the requirements to vote and you're telling them which voting district you intend to vote in based on where you live. You'll notice on the image below, this is a screenshot of an actual voter registration form. If you notice that one part, it shows you that if you're homeless, you can still vote. You have to register at your home as the intersection that you usually sleep at. This is because in Wisconsin, we do not deny people the right to vote simply because they don't have a place to live. What makes Wisconsin special is that in Wisconsin, you can register to vote on election day at the place you're going to vote. Very few states allow this. Some states require you to register to vote for the election weeks before the election itself. But in Wisconsin, all you have to do is show up on election day to the place that you're supposed to vote with the proper paperwork. You can register and vote at the same time. A polling place is a vocabulary term that means the place you actually go to vote inside your voting district. So for most people in Cudahy, that's right here at Cudahy High School. For the rest of the people in the city, that's Cudahy Family Library. It's important you look up what district you live in and where your polling place is so you know where to go on election day. When you register, you have to show a photo ID and prove you live where you say you live when you're registering. You can also use bills, government documents, paycheck stubs, and more to verify where you live. The photo ID part is important though. Once you've figured out where you have to vote and you're registered, you have to become educated about what's on the ballot. You need to know who's running for what office and what candidate best matches your personal political views on what you want to see the government doing. You should also be aware if there's any referendums on your ballot. Referendums are questions voters are asked to directly weigh in on. A lot of school funding is done this way now in Wisconsin. When we need more money for the schools, we have to directly ask the voters of the district, are you willing to raise your own taxes in order to give more money to the schools? This is called a referendum measure. Sometimes ballots will also have suggested changes to the U.S. and Wisconsin state constitution. These amendments can be confusing and worded in a way that you might not be familiar with, as they're written in a very legal type language. This makes being educated and being able to do your own research and figure out what the amendments say and what the consequences of these amendments will be all the more important. It's why it's so critical you get this education, you pay attention, and you find trusted sources of information so that you can make the best decisions. Once you've registered, figured out where you need to vote, and actually done your research to figure out how you want to vote, you need to show up on election day to your polling place with a photo ID and wait in line for your ballot. Now, most cases, you're only going to wait a couple minutes, but there can be occasions where the wait can take a couple hours. As long as you're in line before the deadline of when polls close, you're still allowed to vote. But again, in most cases, the wait's only a few minutes long. And again, a reminder, you can only vote at the polling place that you're designated to vote in. You can't just go to any polling place. And a reminder, this is because different polling places have different ballots, as different communities are voting for different offices as well as for some of the same offices. So if you move, say, from the green circle in Ward 3 in District 1 into Ward 4 in District 2, you have to re-register. This is because you'll be going to a different voting place, and your ballot will have different people on it. Then you actually get your ballot and you fill it out by filling in the bubble next to the candidate's name that you want to vote for. Once you've filled in the bubbles completely and follow the directions on the ballot, you'll take it to an election official next to a secure voting machine and you'll feed it into the machine to have your vote counted. However, in Wisconsin, you do not have to vote on election day. You can vote early. This is called absentee voting. Some states require you to give a reason for why you're going to vote absentee, such as you're going to be out of town, or maybe you're paralyzed and it's just too inconvenient to get out to the polling place. But in Wisconsin, you can vote absentee for any reason, including being in prison for a misdemeanor, but not a felony. If you want to vote by mail absentee before Election Day, you have to request an absentee ballot from your local clerk. You can do that by visiting the website that I linked to on your note sheet. They will require you to provide verification that you are registered to vote and you are who you say you are. All in all, it's a pretty straightforward process that's pretty painless. When that ballot comes in the mail, you vote by filling in the bubble next to the candidate's name that you want to vote for. You'll then place that ballot in a confidential envelope provided with your ballot that'll make it impossible for anyone to know who you voted for without actually opening up the envelope itself, which would be a felony. Once you've placed the ballot in the envelope, you're going to drop the ballot off at your city hall, in a mailbox, or a designated drop box in your city. There was some controversy a couple years ago about whether it was legal for cities to provide drop boxes for ballots at specific locations, but the Wisconsin State Supreme Court ruled in July of 2024 that these drop boxes are safe and legal to be used. You'll usually see them at places like public libraries. You can also vote absentee in person, which is very similar to voting by mail. However, when voting absentee in person, you don't need to fill out an application ahead of time requesting the ballot to be mailed to you. Instead, you can show up at your local city hall in the weeks leading up to the election and cast your ballot at the city clerk's office. Many people enjoy voting early in order to beat any lines or delays that might happen from voting in person on election day. So, big question, why don't more people vote then? This chart shows voter turnout for presidential elections, the blue line, and midterm elections, the orange line. Midterms are elections that happen 2 years into the president's 4-year term, where we elect members of Congress. This chart shows voter turnout from the late 1700s until 2020. You'll see that voter turnout peaked in the mid to late 1800s, and since then hasn't really ever reached those heights again. So the question is, why is this? Today, less than 70% of Americans who can vote actually bother to vote for president. Usually, it's closer to 50 to 60% of people who can vote for president show up and actually vote for president. When the president is not up for election, turnout is usually closer to 40%. So that's less than half of the people who can vote actually bother to vote when the president is not on the ballot. In local elections, it's even worse. In 2022, only 33.83% of people who could vote for Mayor of Cudahy actually bothered to vote in that election for our mayor. Which means to win his election, he really only needed about 17% of eligible voters to actually show up and vote for him. So why is turnout so low? Well, there's several reasons. One, younger voters don't seem to feel it's important to vote. A growing number of young people in your generation are actually turning their backs on democracy, seeing it as a failed system that just doesn't work for them. Then many states are passing laws making it harder to vote, especially if you have a family and or a job that doesn't have a flexible schedule, which means showing up to vote is much more difficult. For example, some states are pushing to make absentee voting more limited, more difficult. Others are making it difficult to register to vote. Some, like Wisconsin, require a photo ID in order to vote, which is difficult for some groups of people, like college students or the elderly or lower income people who don't have photo IDs necessarily. And then there are laws banning felons from voting even after they're off papers. Another reason why there's low turnout is a lot of people feel that neither party, the Democrats nor the Republicans, actually represent what they want the government to do, and so why bother vote for what they would call the lesser of two evils? This is a consequence of having a two-party system where you really only have two choices. In other countries, they have multiple parties, and so people have more options when they vote, leading to higher turnout. And then there's the feeling that one vote doesn't really matter, so why bother? All right, we've reached the end of today's lessons. Again, take a moment to rewrite today's goal from the top of the note sheet so that you can be aware of what it was we were trying to learn. Identify 3 important facts from these notes that you could use to help you prove you met today's goal. And then, as always, show me your thinking. Write at least one question you still have that could help you better meet this learning goal. All right, we'll see you in class.